When I moved to Rome from Washington, D.C., one sight struck me more than any ancient column or grand basilica: people doing nothing. I'd frequently glimpse old women leaning out of their windows, seeing people pass below, or families on their evening strolls, stopping every so often to greet friends. Even office life proved different. Forget the rush deskside sandwich. Come lunchtime, restaurants filled up with professionals tucking into proper meals. Of course, ever since grand tourists began penning their observations in the 17th century, outsiders have stereotyped the idea of Italian indolence. And it isn't the whole story. The same friends who headed home on their scooters for a leisurely lunch often returned to the office to work until 8 p.m. Even so, the apparent belief in balancing hard work with il dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing, always struck me. After all, doing nothing appears to be the opposite of being productive. And productivity, whether creative, intellectual or industrial, is the ultimate use of our time. As we fill our days with more and more doing, many of us are finding that going non-stop isn't the apotheosis of productivity. It is its adversary. But as we fill our days with more and more doing, many of us are finding that non-stop activity isn't the apotheosis of productivity. It is its adversary. Researchers are learning that it doesn't just mean that the work we produce at the end of a 14-hour day is of worse quality than when we are fresh. This pattern of working also undermines our creativity and our cognition. Over time, it can make us feel physically sick, and even, ironically, as if we have no purpose. Which mindless activities inspire your best ideas? Share your story on our Facebook page. Think of mental work as doing push-ups, says Josh Davis, author of 2 Awesome Hours. Say you want to do 10,000. The most efficient way would be to do them all at once without a break. We know instinctively, though, that is impossible. Instead, if we did just a few at a time, between other activities and stretched out over weeks, hitting 10,000 would become far more feasible. The brain is very much like a muscle in this respect. Davis writes, set up the wrong conditions through constant work and we can accomplish little. Set up the right conditions and there is probably little we can't do. Many of us, though, tend to think of our brains not as muscles, but as a computer, a machine capable of constant work. Not only is that untrue, but pushing ourselves to work for hours without a break can be harmful, some experts say. People who worked more than 11 hours a day were almost 2.5 times more likely to have a major depressive episode than those who worked 7 to 8. The idea that you can indefinitely stretch out your deep focus and productivity time to these arbitrary limits is really wrong. It's self-defeating, says research scientist Andrew Smart, author of Autopilot. If you're constantly putting yourself into this cognitive debt, where your physiology is saying, I need a break, but you keep pushing yourself, you get this low-level stress response that's chronic, and, over time, extraordinarily dangerous. One meta-analysis found that long working hours increased the risk of coronary heart disease by 40%, almost as much as smoking 50%. Another found that people who worked long hours had a significantly higher risk of stroke, while people who worked more than 11 hours a day were almost 2.5 times more likely to have a major depressive episode than those who worked 7 to 8. In Japan, this has led to the disturbing trend of karoshi, or death by overwork. If you're wondering if this means that you might want to consider taking that long overdue holiday, the answer may be yes. One study of businessmen in Helsinki found that over 26 years, executives and businessmen who took fewer holidays in midlife predicted both earlier deaths and worse health in old age. Holidays also can literally pay off. One study of more than 5,000 time American workers found that people who took fewer than 10 of their paid holiday days a year had a little more than a 1-in-3 chance of getting a pay rise or a bonus over 3 years. People who took more than 10 days? A 2-in-3 chance. Productivity provenance. It's easy to think that efficiency and productivity is an entirely new obsession. But philosopher Bertrand Russell would have disagreed. It will be said that while a little leisure is pleasant, men would not know how to fill their days if they had only 4 hours work out of the 24. Russell wrote in 1932, adding, it would not have been true at any earlier period. There was formerly a capacity for lightheartedness and play which has been to some extent inhibited by the cult of efficiency. The modern man thinks that everything ought to be done for the sake of something else, and never for its own sake. It will be said that while a little leisure is pleasant, men would not know how to fill their days if they had only 4 hours work out of the 24. Bertrand Russell. That said, some of the world's most creative, productive people realized the importance of doing less. They had a strong work ethic, but also remained dedicated to rest and play. Work on one thing at a time until finished, wrote artist and writer Henry Miller in his 11 Commandments on Writing. Stop at the appointed time. Keep human, see people, go places, drink if you feel like it. Even U.S. founding father Benjamin Franklin, a model of industriousness, devoted large swaths of his time to being idle. Every day he had a 2-hour lunch break, free evenings, and a night's sleep. Instead of working non-stop at his career as a printer, which paid the bills, he spent huge amounts of time on hobbies and socializing. In fact, the very interests that took him away from his primary profession led to so many of the wonderful things he's known for, like inventing the Franklin stove and the lightning rod, writes Davis. Even on a global level, there is no clear correlation between a country's productivity and average working hours. With a 38.6-hour work week, for example, the average U.S. employee works 4.6 hours a week longer than a Norwegian. But by GDP, Norway's workers contribute the equivalent of $78.70 per hour, compared to the U.S.'s $69.60. The very interests that took him away from his primary profession led to so many of the wonderful things he's known for. Josh Davis is for Italy, that home of Il Dolce Far Niente. With an average 35.5-hour work week, it produces almost 40% more per hour than Turkey, where people work an average of 47.9 hours per week. It even edges the United Kingdom, where people work 36.5 hours. All of those coffee breaks, it seems, may not be so bad. Brainwave: the reason we have either work days at all was because companies found that cutting employees' hours had the reverse effect they expected. It upped their productivity. During the Industrial Revolution, 10 to 16-hour days were normal. Ford was the first company to experiment with an either day, and found its workers were more productive not only per hour, but overall. Within 2 years, their profit margins doubled. One survey of almost 2,000 time office workers in the UK found that people were only productive for 2 hours and 53 minutes out of an either day. If either days are the better than 10-hour ones, could even shorter working hours be even better? Perhaps. For people over 40, research found that a 25-hour work week may be optimal for cognition, while when Sweden recently experimented with 6-hour work days, it found that employees had better health and productivity. This seems borne out by how people behave during the working day. One survey of almost 2,000 time office workers in the UK found that people were only productive for 2 hours and 53 minutes out of an either day. The rest of the time was spent checking social media, reading the news, having non-work-related chats with colleagues, eating, and even searching for new jobs. When we are pushing ourselves to the edge of our capabilities, we need more breaks than we think. Most people can only handle an hour of deliberate practice without taking a rest. We can focus for an even shorter period of time when we're pushing ourselves to the edge of our capabilities. Researchers like Stockholm University psychologist K. Anders Ericsson have found that when engaging in the kind of deliberate practice necessary to truly master any skill, we need more breaks than we think. Most people can only handle an hour without taking a rest. And many at the top, like elitians, authors and athletes, never dedicate more than 5 hours a day consistently to their craft. The other practice they share? Their increased tendency to take recuperative naps. Ericsson writes, one way, of course, to rest both brain and body. Other studies have also found that taking short breaks from a task help participants maintain their focus and continue performing at a high level. Not taking breaks made their performance worse. Active rest, but rest, as some researchers point out, isn't necessarily the best word for what we are doing when we think we are doing nothing. As we've written about before, the part of the brain that activates when you're doing nothing, known as the default mode network (DMN), plays a crucial role in memory consolidation and envisioning the future. It's also the area of the brain that activates when people are ing others, thinking about themselves, making a moral judgment, or processing other people's emotions. In other words, if this network were switched off, we might struggle to remember, foresee consequences, grasp social interactions, understand ourselves, act ethically, or empathize with others, all of the things that make us not only functional in the workplace, but in life. It helps you recognize the deeper importance of situations. It helps you make meaning out of things. When you're not making meaning out of things, you're just reacting and acting in the moment, and you're subject to many kinds of cognitive and emotional maladaptive behaviors and beliefs, says Mary Helena Mortano-Yang, a neuroscientist and researcher at the University of Southern California's Brain and Creativity Institute. If, like Archimedes, you got your last good idea while in the bath or on a stroll, you have your biology to thank. We also wouldn't be able to come up with new ideas or connections. The birthplace of creativity, the DMN lights up when you're making associations between seemingly unrelated subjects or coming up with original ideas. It is also the place where your moments lurk, which means if, like Archimedes, you got your last good idea while in the bath or on a stroll, you have your biology to thank. Perhaps most importantly of all, if we don't take time to turn our attention inward, we lose a crucial element of happiness. We're just doing things without making meaning out of it a lot of the time. Amorta Yang says, when you don't have the ability to embed your actions into a broader cause, they feel purposeless over time, and empty, and not connected to your broader sense of self. And we know that not having a purpose over time is connected to not having optimal psychological and physiological health, monkey mind. But as anyone who has tried meditation knows, doing nothing is surprisingly difficult. How many of us, after 30 seconds of downtime, reach for our phones? In fact, it makes us so uncomfortable that we'd rather hurt ourselves. Literally. Across 11 different studies, researchers found that participants would rather do anything, even administer themselves electric shocks, instead of nothing. And it wasn't as if they were asked to sit still for long, between 6 and 15 minutes. Good news is that you don't have to do absolutely nothing to reap benefits. It's true that rest is important. But so is active reflection, chewing through an issue you have, or thinking about an idea. In fact, anything that requires visualizing hypothetical outcomes or imagined scenarios, like discussing a problem with friends, or getting lost in a good book, also helps, Amorta Yang says. If you're purposeful, you even can engage your DM, and if you're looking at social media, if you're just looking at a pretty photo, it's deactivated. But if you're pausing and allowing yourself to internally riff on the broader story of why that person in the photo is feeling that way, crafting a narrative around it, then you may very well be activating those networks, she says. Even taking just one walk, preferably outside, has been proven to significantly increase creativity. It also doesn't take much time to undo the detrimental effects of constant activity. When both adults and children were sent outdoors, without their devices, for 4 days, their performance on a task that measured both creativity and problem-solving improved by 50%. Even taking just one walk, preferably outside, has been proven to significantly increase creativity. Another highly effective method of repairing the damage is meditation. As little as a week of practice for subjects who never meditated before, or a single session for experienced practitioners, can improve creativity, mood, memory, and focus. Any other tasks that don't require 100% concentration also can help, like knitting or doodling. As Virginia Woolf wrote in A Room of One's Own, drawing pictures was an idle way of finishing an unprofitable morning's work. Yet it is in our idleness, in our dreams, that the submerged truth sometimes comes to the top. Time out, whether it's walking away from your desk for 15 minutes or logging out of your inbox for the night. Part of our struggle is control, the fear that if we relax a grip for a moment, everything will come crashing down. That's all wrong, says poet, entrepreneur and life coach Yana Robinson. The metaphor I like to use is of a fire. We start a business, and then after a year, it's like, when can we take a week off, or hire someone to come in? Most of us don't trust someone to come in for us. We're like, the fire will go out, she says. What if we just trusted that those embers are so hot, we can walk away? Someone can throw a log on and it'll burst into flames. That isn't easy for those of us who feel like we have to constantly do. But in order to do more, it seems, we may have to become comfortable with doing less. To comment on this story or anything else you have seen on BBC Capital, please head over to our Facebook page or message us on Twitter. If you liked this story, sign up for the weekly BBC.com features newsletter called If You Only Read 6 Things This Week. A hand-picked selection of stories from BBC, Future, Culture, Capital and Travel, delivered to your inbox every Friday.